If today you said, hey, because there's a shortage and there's a world pandemic, we're going to say no more intellectual property rights, it sends a very bad message because people will stop making new vaccines.
Could you please just briefly introduce yourself first?
My name is Aditya Berlia. Please call me Addy. I have almost 15 plus years experience in the pharmaceutical sector. I have built and designed manufacturing facilities in India and across the world. I have audited and looked at the entire industry from every single aspect, and of course done a fair bit of work both in filing for patents and also then seeing how we can use the existing IP that exists in the world to create new products.
As we know that recently US President Joe Biden last week just backed a call from India and South Africa to waive patent protection for the COVID-19 vaccines. And I wonder what your take is on this, and do you personally approve of this?
I think the short answer, it's not a great idea.
Okay.
The long answer requires to understand a little bit of what's happening around the world and why do people think this is a great idea in the first place, right? The vaccines that we have today were just invented last year. Yeah. These are not vaccines which we've had for 5, 10, 20 years where people understand how they are made, how they're used. Now, the problem, what you have with this is that because a lot of the patents that have been filed, right? What is a patent? A patent is, it's like a cooking recipe you found online, and not a very good one, right? It's like, oh, make this, put a little bit of this goes. It's like reading the ingredients list on a food and saying, based off on that, I'm going to recreate the entire food. That's not how it works. The way you normally do it is that you have years and years of study, reverse engineering to figure out how someone else did it. And as you get more familiar with the platform, as you get familiar with the technology, you're able to transfer this. In the case of COVID-19 and these vaccines, the mRNA stuff just came out last year. There are a large number of patents on them, but everybody who understands and is working on mRNA has already been hired, right? Every manufacturing facility capable of making most vaccine has already been licensed.
Only with the patent waiver is far than enough to address the shortage of COVID-19 vaccines globally, because we need all those technologies to produce the vaccines, and also many countries, they have very strict export control of the ingredients.
So the big points are, even if you have the patent, so what? It requires what is called tacit knowledge, knowledge of how to make it. I think that's why just waiving the patents doesn't really make any sense, because by the time a third-party company studies the patents, they try a couple of experiments, redo the recipe, it's a bit too late. Even though you might have the ability and the technology to make this, to do it at scale, you need to get a lot of the supply chain bits and pieces in place. And that requires a global coordination. It's not possible to just do it in a single country alone. And that's another barrier which you have to overcome. And that just means it takes more and more time.
Right now, in the short term, the Biden's government's decision is kind of more like a symbolic action than having some substantive meaning. So it's not going to directly address a global shortage of vaccines.
I think it's dangerous. If today you said, hey, because there's a shortage and there's a world pandemic, we're going to say no more intellectual property rights, it sends a very bad message because people will stop making new vaccines because they'll say, you know what, there's no point. And the worst part is a whole bunch of companies working on COVID cures, COVID drugs. They'll also say, hey, there's no point investing because the moment we make this drug, they'll waive our intellectual property. So let's stop investing. So I think it sends a very bad signal to all the innovative players around the world.
Could you please tell us about how the virus surge in India has affected the domestic vaccine production or exports in India, and how is the vaccination program, how is the vaccination rate, for example, in India, and are people willing to take a vaccine?
So the good news is, at least in terms of the pandemic affecting the 2-3 major vaccine manufacturers in India, it hasn't. I think what is troubling everybody, and this is where India is struggling right now, that the scale up that was expected That hasn't happened the way it should. Now that is changing. The great news is that apart from our two major domestic manufacturers, you have the Sputnik 5, which is coming into India, which has been licensed to 5 more manufacturers. And I think we are on track to do about 100 million, 200 million doses within the country. 1.4 billion, 1.3 billion people, so that's still not enough. I do think maybe a couple of months ago, there was still a little bit of vaccine hesitancy in India. But I think with the deep impact that COVID is happening in the second wave now, I think most people have seen how effective these vaccines are in preventing death. And that's why we have such now a large waiting line for vaccines compared to our supply. But my hope is, I think within 3 months, we should be able to at least get the most people at risk vaccinated.
China has provided India with the most oxygen concentrators and as well as other medical equipment to India. And how would you comment on this?
Tom, one of the things which I deeply admire about China is its sheer manufacturing capacity, right? 30 days ago, 45 days ago, when I think a lot of us started to understand the degree of the surge that is going to come, I think all of us, turned all across the world for aid. But I think China is seen as not just a partner who is helping us through aid donations, but it's also seen as a partner whose manufacturing capabilities will allow us to get. A couple of days ago, I was on the phone with a couple of sources from China. I'm very grateful that we were able to access that level of manufacturing capacity. And the ability of both the Chinese and the Indian government to try to get this aid as soon as possible to India.
The whole mankind, we are a community with a shared future. And only through joint efforts by all sectors all around the world can we one day eventually achieve the fair and equitable distribution of vaccines around the world.